Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. We're going to unpack something pretty heavy today. You know, those intense relationship dynamics that, for whatever reason, feel literally impossible to walk away from? Yeah, those. If you've ever felt like your romantic life is less of a, fairy tale and more of a massive construction project, well, you're in exactly the right place. We're looking at the architecture of duty and devotion and how those two concepts can sometimes get dangerously tangled up. So there's this concept that perfectly captures the vibe here. You may attract relationships that feel serious, intense, and difficult to walk away from. Think about your dating history for a second. Right from the get-go, you might find yourself naturally pulling in bonds that feel profoundly serious, like deeply anchored from day one. There's just this immediate gravity to them. They aren't casual, they're definitely not fleeting, and man, they are certainly not easy to exit once you've stepped through the front door. Which leads us to a pretty heavy question, but it's an absolutely crucial one to ask. Have you ever stayed in a relationship out of duty rather than happiness? Are you waking up every day choosing joy, or are you basically clocking into a shift because you feel like you owe it to someone? It's a really tough thing to ask yourself, for sure, but you gotta ask it if you feel stuck carrying the emotional weight of a partnership. All right, part one, the blueprint of intense bonds. Let's see how this all starts. So the emotional bonds in these specific types of relationships, they don't just exist in a vacuum. They almost always come prepackaged with heavy responsibilities, obligations, or immediate long-term commitments. We are not talking about breezy, let's just see where the weekend takes us kind of flings here. You're essentially building a foundation out of obligation, which instantly and drastically changes the entire gravity of the connection. Moving right along to part two, when connection becomes heavy work. You see, this heavy architecture progresses in a really predictable way. Point one, you start out with that intense connection. Point two, you begin accruing shared problems. And finally, point three, the relationship literally feels like a second job. Emotional burdens don't just drop on you all at once, right? Actually, scratch that. It's more like they accumulate slowly over time, day by day, problem by problem, until you wake up and the relationship feels way more like heavy labor than a genuine, life-giving connection. And this creates the ultimate trap. It's the classic battle between duty and happiness. As that timeline creeps forward, you might find yourself sticking around way longer than necessary just because the scale has tipped. You stay, driven entirely by a sense of obligation and duty to this structure you've built, rather than any actual present happiness. The relationship survives, sure, but it's running purely on the fuel of obligation. Part three, shared baggage and recurring themes. Let's unpack that suitcase. So what exactly makes up all this weight? Well, usually it's a mix of shared problems, financial debts, complex family issues, and deeply rooted emotional baggage. And the thing is, the source material shows us these aren't just isolated incidents. They become recurring themes. They completely take up all the oxygen in your relationship. Instead of talking about your dreams or your future, your connection becomes entirely about managing these four heavy elements. You essentially become co-managers of a crisis rather than romantic partners. Kind of crazy when you think about it. And when your relationship is built from those heavy materials, letting go feels nearly impossible. You aren't just walking away from a person. You're trying to untangle yourself from deep guilt, a profound sense of responsibility, and a really long, complicated shared history. Leaving these unhealthy attachments feels like abandoning your post. It's that intense feeling of responsibility that keeps you frozen in place, even when you know, deep down, the attachment is no longer healthy. Okay, part four, a loyalty versus emotional obligation. This is where it gets tricky. First, let's untangle loyalty. True loyalty is a genuine, healthy devotion and allegiance to a partner. It's an active choice. It's a supportive stance you take simply because you value the person and the connection. But as things get heavy, you might deeply struggle to remember what this true, healthy loyalty actually looks and feels like. The lines get super blurry. Because in these heavy relationships, true loyalty is often completely hijacked and replaced by emotional obligation. This is when you feel bound to stay due to guilt, history, or a sense of trapped duty. You struggle to separate that healthy loyalty we just talked about from this heavy emotional obligation. You really have to ask yourself a tough question. Are you staying because you're devoted to their well-being and your shared joy? Or are you bound because the guilt and the history make you feel like you literally have no other choice? Finally, part five, the ultimate relationship lesson. But hey, here's the silver lining. There's a really profound, fascinating dynamic at play here. Challenge versus ease. Relationships like the ones we're dissecting act as massive catalysts for deep psychological growth. And crucially, this growth is driven intensely by challenge, rather than by comfort or ease. Honestly, we learn very little about ourselves when everything is perfectly smooth. It's the heavy, intense bonds that really force us to look in the mirror and evolve. Through all that weight, through all the shared problems and the baggage, your partners are actually bringing you vital, life-altering lessons. You are being forced to develop endurance, patience, and true emotional maturity. You're out there building emotional muscles you never would have developed in a breezy, easy relationship. The friction is actually creating incredible psychological resilience. So the ultimate long-term masterclass derived from all of this is learning the difference between conscious commitment and emotional entrapment. A conscious commitment is a daily, active choice to stand by your partner. You're fully aware of the flaws, but you're actively choosing the joy and the growth. Emotional entrapment, on the other hand, that's feeling like the walls have closed in and you're surviving solely on duty and guilt. Learning to identify which room you are standing in is basically the masterclass of your relational life. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to look closely at your own relationship architecture. Conscious commitment or emotional entrapment? Which of these two are you truly building today? Are you laying bricks of resentment and obligation? Or are you building a structure of healthy devotion and growth? It's a heavy question, but answering it might just be the most liberating work you ever do. Thanks for hanging out with me and keep questioning the architecture of your life.